Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. We are very excited to be here, talk about data, scoring, and all the fun stuff you want to talk about on a Friday morning. I hope Greenbuild has been great for all of you. Anyone go to the reviewer party last night? Oh, you guys are the real fans of ARC for showing up today. Thank you. Did anyone go to the previous session at 8 a.m., also on ARC? Man, wow. You guys are the real fans. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't expect 2 ARC sessions to be back-to-back, but I'll take it. And being able to talk to all of you on any given day is a pleasure. It's truly the highlight when I can get on the phone and talk to someone about ARC. So I really appreciate you taking the time today. I have to show you the slides so that all of us get LEAD continuing education credits. And I have to show you the slides so you know that we are the people who said we would come and talk to you about it. I'm thrilled to be joined by Barry. Barry has been an early adopter with several questions to now a committed partner with still several questions. But I appreciate him having you. Thank you for being here, Barry.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. So how many people here were in the session yesterday in this room at, I think it was 4:30? Okay, good number of people. So the theme that they used in that session was they made it like a storybook, and it was pretty much an adventure story. It kind of had an intro, and they went through some of the challenging things that the characters faced, and it wound up, you know, as most adventure stories wind up, with a nice closure ending type of thing. So I was trying to think, well, how do we continue that kind of literary theme? And to me, I think what we're doing here in this session is more like a mystery novel. So, but the thing about it is, you already are halfway through it, because I'm sure everyone here has been to one or more ARC sessions this week. A number of people have probably played on the ARC platform or looked into it to a certain extent. So you're probably at the point where you don't know what the hell is going on in this story. And what we're going to try to do is bring you to the end of the mystery novel in 1 hour. So, but I want to set expectations where they need to be set. So, you know also that when you read a mystery novel, if it's a really good mystery novel, you really don't understand everything at the end of the novel. And you're hoping there's going to be a sequel. So we're not going to get you to complete understanding of every mysterious aspect of ARC in the next hour. But I hope what we're going to do is get to about 80% of that understanding. And when you think about it, what is 80 in this world? 80 is platinum. So if we get you to 80%, we're doing pretty damn good. Of course, our goal is net zero mysteries left, but we're going to shoot for platinum today. So hopefully you'll join us and you'll wind up at platinum at the end of the session.
Awesome. How many of you have been in ARC already? Excellent. How many of you have projects that are scoring in ARC? How many are at LEAD Platinum? Wonderful. Hopefully some more. Also want to know, while Barry and I are going to share some stories with you, there's many of you in the room that have your own stories, and Greenbuild is about making those connections. So by a show of hands, how many of you have projects in North America? How many of you in South America? Europe? Asia? Australia? Wonderful. So there's someone here you can talk to about a project in your own country. So please seek them out. Greenbuild is about making those connections. ARC is currently in across 80 countries. Over 1.5 billion square feet is leveraging ARC to track carbon emissions, benchmark performance, and really together work towards global action. We have multiple people engaged with ARC, including students, which really brightens my day. We have students in over 100 schools, public schools in the US, that are using ARC to enter data, track performance, and report back to their sustainability teams of what can be done better. These are science projects, geography projects, social studies projects, and it's really to get started at a very young age in terms of what can be done in the building. The intent of ARC was to accelerate the mission of the US Green Building Council and the Green Business Certification, Inc., which is green buildings for everyone within this generation. We've been doing that with LEED for 25 years, and that's been exceptional. But today, the urgency of what we need to do is much more. We need to drive faster and get to that goal of better buildings sooner. And data and technology can help us do that. ARC is just one piece of that puzzle. We say hello in many languages. Hello, namaste in Hindi, adab in Urdu, hola, as I recently learned, and many more. But there's only one way to say data, right? Whether you say data, datos, it's the same thing, because numbers are the same thing all over the world. So with ARC, we're giving you a performance score of 0 to 100. Everyone knows what that means. Better scores are better buildings. No one wants to be in the bottom 25%. Some may want to be in the middle 50%, but almost everyone wants to be in the top 25, 10, 5, LEED Platinum %, right? And that's what ARC tells you. It tells you today, how are you doing? So the performance score in ARC, as most of you already know, is a score of 0 to 100. It's really a benchmark of where you stand in every category of ARC, whether that's energy, water, waste, transportation, or human experience. The intent is to offer a common language across the world to say which building is performing at what level. All right. Here's where your mystery novel starts and the preface ends. What data do I need? You need the size of the building, which is the square area, operating hours, how many people are in the building, and where are you located. These simple pieces of information really help determine and give insights from that data. So for example, if you have a very large building with multiple transient occupants, that's a convention center. If you have a very large building with people regularly throughout the week, that could be a shopping complex. If you have a building that runs 40 hours or 60 hours a week, that's an office building. And so there are insights just from these simple pieces of information that tell us the kind of building that it is. Next, you provide easily available data that you might already have. How many of you track energy and water for your own assets or portfolio? Almost every building has this piece of information. It's very easy to get started. You're looking at 12 consecutive months of data that can be entered into ARC. And there's many ways to do that. Portfolio manager, an Excel template, a building automation system, or just typing it directly into the interface. The other pieces of information, waste, transportation, and human experience, can also be simplified and perhaps easily collected. For example, with waste, we're looking at least one waste analysis in the year. How many of you have conducted a waste audit previously? Awesome. So we're looking for the quantity of waste generated and the quantity of waste diverted. So the big question, how does this data become a score? When you provide us with these pieces of information, it goes into the ARC platform as the data input. It then gets compared with similar projects within the platform. And then you get a score depending on where you are, across the board, across the globe. The global piece is really critical. And the performance score really determines where you stand. Another important piece of this is my score current, or how is my score current? Because what we're looking to do is look back at the most recent 365 days or 1 year and tell you how you're performing today, at any point in time, at any time of the day. So that's how current your score is. So at any point of the time, ARC looks back at 365 days worth of data, from month 1 to month 12. So you might provide energy data across those 12 months, water data, conduct a waste audit, conduct a survey that collects transportation and human experience, and conduct an air quality evaluation for CO2 and TVOC. What you're seeing on the screen is the ideal situation where all the information is collected in the same 12-month period. How many of you have seen your score go to 0 on one day for waste or transportation? It's because the data was out of date, right? It was older than it was 365. For example, if I conducted the transportation survey in October of last year, today it would not be current, and my score would be 0. So it's very important to think about your data in the most recent 12 months and make sure that it's all current. Why does the score need a code? If you've not seen what computer software code looks like, this is what it looks like. It's black with white syntax. The reason we need code is to really leverage the power of computational data that we're collecting across the world. If I myself had to take a spreadsheet and run 1.5 billion square feet to generate scores at any point of the day, I don't think that's possible. I could try. It's not possible. We even tried to do it in the early days, and even then we ran out of the capacity of Excel or other offline tools that could generate scores. And so we wrote all the rules into a software code to generate that for us. So if your building is looking to provide data every 5 seconds, we can give you a score every 5 seconds. And that's only possible because it's in a code. OK. Today's session is really to give you some ideas of what we hear from everyone who talks to us about ARC, who's using ARC, and what are some of the questions they're thinking about, you're thinking about. There's many of them, but if we condense them into maybe a simple format that we could follow through in the rest of the conversation, this is what it would be. What data do I need, or how easy is it to get that data? Where do I get it from? A data collection question. I got my data in, great. What does my score mean? Why do I get such a score? It's too high, too low. Those are your next tier questions. And then, perhaps most importantly, did that score motivate you to do something? That's where we want to go with ARC. What can you do about the score? How do you improve it? How do you improve the building? So I'm going to request Barry to give us his perspective and his client's perspective as some of the answers to these questions.
OK. So the question of the score is the focus of what we're talking about today. And this is the visualization that everyone should be well familiar with at this point. And this is one way of looking at the score that comes out of ARC. And I've seen this image thousands of times over the last couple of years. But it was really this morning that it dawned on me what you really see in this. And you see two things. Well, you might see more things than two, but I see two things. You see the points that you get if you're using ARC for a LEED certification. You see the points in each of the 5 categories, and then you see the total. But then you also see where you're at in terms of the potential points. And this one visual kind of gives you both of those in a very quick way. So if you're seeking LEED certification, you can see where you stand in each category and in the total. But even if you're not seeking LEED certification, you want to know, where do you stand versus what the ultimate number is. And so that where you're at on these racetracks gives you that view. And then if you're looking at, if you don't care about the points so much, this is a visual that's also available on the ARC platform that more illustrates the 1 to 100, where you're at in that scale. And one of the things that we had difficulty with at first about the ARC platform was why some places you have a 1 to 100 and some places you show the maximum points for lead. It's very confusing. Why are you making it so complicated? There are really two things going on here, and so you need two different numbers. In each category, you need a number that represents how are you doing compared to the best you could possibly do, which is 100 for that category. And so there you have the 0 to 100. But then you have to translate that into lead points based on the weighting of how important is that category in the overall picture of lead. And every lead rating system does that. It's just that you don't necessarily think about where you're at in the 0 to 100. You just think, I got 15 lead points. So with ARC, you're actually looking at both aspects. You're looking at it in a relative sense for each category, how are you doing? And then you're looking at the priority that the lead rating system has put on that category to see where you're at in terms of points. And when you go to the portfolio view in ARC, where someone who's managing or owns a portfolio of buildings and you want to look at how your portfolio is doing and how do you prioritize your efforts, this is what you see. And in this sense, you can see where you're at in terms of lead points, but visually, you can also get a sense of how are these buildings doing relative to the different categories and where they could be. So you might have a score of, if you just looked at the lead points and you said, well, I got 28 energy points and 7 water points, but what does that mean in terms of how well you're doing? The next building, same energy performance, a lot higher water points. So from this quick visual, what are your issues in each building? Not just which building can get what level of certification, but how to dig into the different elements that are involved and where to focus your efforts. So how do you engage? I think most people here probably are already engaged to a certain degree, so I'll just go through this quickly. One thing that I think has been hammered home pretty well this week is every LEED certified building is already in ARC. Every LEED registered building is already in ARC. You can put data in and play with it, and you don't have to pay a registration fee. It's already there. And then if you're putting it in to start with, the slide that Gautami showed at the beginning in terms of the basic information, all you need is the floor area, the occupancy, and the operating hours, and the address, which will give the geographic location. And that's all that the system needs in order to look at the basic input information for the building. Usually what we do is immediately you can typically get 12 months of energy and water data. It's readily available. You throw that in, and then you know where you stand on those two categories 10 minutes after you open the ARC platform. If you have waste data, you can do it with that too, but typically it's going to take a little bit more effort to get the other categories figured out. You look at your score, you assess where you're at, you prioritize your efforts, you make improvements, you submit it for review, and then you achieve LEED certification. I'll hand it back over to Gautami to start. Now we're going to go through each of the categories and start to unravel those mysteries.
Oh my. So with transportation, the intent is to really track, measure, and lower carbon emissions. We wouldn't know what to lower if we don't know where we're at. And so with ARC, we're offering a very simplified way to collect information that all of us know and then convert it into carbon emissions. So how many of you have taken this survey in ARC? Straightforward, right? You pick your mode of travel, and you enter the distance traveled. So for example, in Washington, D.C., I take the train for about 5 miles, so that's how I would enter it. You can also enter it in multiple languages and multiple units of measurement, kilometers, for example, in India. But of course, the survey is available in English, French, Portuguese, German, and Chinese. Once you enter this information, the platform converts each response into carbon emissions. So when you provide us the distance traveled and the mode of travel, we take both of those and convert it into carbon. So for example, with my example of taking the metro for 5 miles, that's heavy rail. So 0.33 multiplied by 5 is my carbon emission for the one-way travel. So the input is distance traveled, converted into carbon emissions, and then the minimum response rate. So the score begins to generate once you achieve a minimum response rate. Typically, that's 25% of your building occupants. And of course, that will go down for much larger buildings. For example, the Willis Tower recently conducted the survey. They did not have to get to 25%. That would be a lot of people. So once that data is provided, we aggregate the information, and it's converted into carbon emissions per person per day. That's the scoring metric that's driving the score for your project. It then gets converted into a score out of 0 to 100, as Barry identified, giving you an absolute comparison if you choose to use that. It also gives you a LEED-weighted score of 0 to 14, which allows you to track your LEED certification level if you choose to pursue a certain one. And of course, at the end of the day, lower the carbon emissions, higher is your score. I always get the question, I have a suburban building, am I going to suck? I have a project in Manhattan, I'm going to do excellently, why do I need to do a transportation survey? All of those are fair yet subjective responses. What we're trying to do is lower carbon emissions across the world. We can't just assume we're going to do great because we're located in a great location. We have to numerically quantify that, and that's what ARC is doing. So we see scores across the board. Thankfully, no one's at the bottom. That would be really, really bad, except that one person there. But most projects score 6 and upwards, and you don't have to take my word for it. When you log into ARC for your project, based on its location, you will get a local average. That's approximately how buildings in that region are scoring. So you don't have to guess, you can see it in ARC. We looked at performance levels across different certifications. Up top is LEED Platinum, thank God. At the bottom, LEED certified, but still better than many other buildings. And so what we're seeing is that the trend continues. If you are designed, operated, located in an appropriate and ideal location, your score is going to reflect that. You are going to do well. So let's talk about this, not across the 1.5 billion, but across the project.
Okay, so that's all well and good, but what does it mean? So we had these 3 questions that were posed earlier that we're going to put back up on the screen for each category. How easy was it to get the data? What did you think about the score? And did the score motivate improvement? In each category, one of these questions really jumps out as the main question that most people have. So I'm going to focus on that, while I might speak a little bit to the others. But for transportation, the data part, there was a great presentation at 8 o'clock this morning about getting that data. It's a survey. There's all kinds of intricacies to that, but we're not going to talk about that. What I wanted to talk about is, what did you think about the score? Because as Gautami said, okay, we know we got a pretty good feel for the transportation score under the previous versions of LEED for existing buildings. And what it boiled down to is, if you're in New York, you get 15 points. And I think it was Gina Bokra said this a couple times this week, that if you're in a building in New York, you have to try not to get LEED Silver, which a lot of it is driven by those 15 transportation points. But there's a different twist to the ARC performance score for transportation, because it's not just asking for the mode of transportation. It's a combination of two things. It's the mode and the distance traveled. And that combination is what determines the carbon emissions associated with each person's commute to the building. So what we found is that New York buildings don't all get the maximum points because some people are coming from long distances. So those automatic points aren't there. They still score very high. Now transportation is worth 14 points, and we typically see the Manhattan buildings getting 12, pretty typically. But what does that mean? It means they can't just ignore that whole issue. They actually have to pay attention to it a little bit. And it also, what we found is that suburban buildings that typically scored poorly have more variation to them, because if they're in a suburban location that has its own sort of focus of live, play, work type of thing, they're going to score better because people are not commuting as long a distance, even if they're driving solo in a car. So just a little flavor to the transportation. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is, in terms of what the score means, is what does it mean if you get the maximum score? And what does it mean if you have a minimum score? So if you get the maximum score, it means you have 0 carbon emissions for the people traveling to the building. Everyone's walking, biking, or riding a nuclear power plant, I guess. That might have been too subtle a joke for this time of the morning, but you'll think about it. You'll figure it out later. So that's 1 point on the scale. The perfect score is 0 carbon emissions related to transportation. What is the other point on the scale? Can anybody tell me what it means to get the minimum? What would that mean in terms of your commuting situation?
I think it's the highest carbon intensity of any of the buildings that are in our exact, right?
Not exactly. Yeah.
Everyone is riding their own car.
Okay. Well, this is not as simple a question as that, but because there's 2 factors involved. There's the mode and there's the distance. So you could have a complex combination of things that are bad that drive the score down. But I did a little quick math, and just to get a feel for this, you don't get to play if every single person in your building is driving 25 miles to work in a single occupancy vehicle. That's 0. Okay? So it might be also if everyone's riding a motorcycle for 100 miles to work, you get 0. But in terms of trying to get your head around what are the 2 points that the score is going between, everyone walking to work, you get perfect, and everyone driving their own car 25 miles or more a day, you get nothing. Okay, so that's the 2 points.
So it's a combination of the 3 answers that we got. Can we hold questions? Thank you.
Okay.
We only got through 1 category. Water. What is the score of 0 to 15? And the intent here is, I'm going to say this over and over again, to know where we are, to know what can be done, and then to go do it. And so water is a category where we're looking to visualize how much water is being consumed, and then to measure it, and then lower it. So for water, we're looking for 12 consecutive months of water use data. This is, again, looking back at the most recent 365 days. You're going to hear me say that again, just because it's really critical. If you want your score to be current, your data has to be current. You can provide the data in multiple formats, including typing it directly into the interface, using Portfolio Manager here in North America, uploading a data template, a billing automation system. The method that you use to provide the data doesn't influence your score. The granularity of the data also doesn't influence your score. So for example, if you're providing data every 15 seconds versus providing data monthly, awesome, you have more data. but that doesn't really mean you have a better building. It doesn't mean you're using less water, so it does not impact your score. It does take the burden off you to upload if you are automating data. So once you have the data in, what can it tell you? We're looking for whole building data. There's many stories that come out of it. So for example, one of the projects had a pretty low score when they started. They weren't enthusiastic about it, and they said they were almost ready to stop using ARC because they thought it was unfair. Looking deeper into the water that is consumed, they realized that their irrigation was much higher than they expected it to be. They then installed various sensors to be able to track and irrigate as needed, and that's when the score went up. So let's take that same example. This property provided the water consumed, which is 12 consecutive months of all building water use. Irrigation, water fixtures, indoor restrooms, cooling towers, everything. The platform then converts this consumption into consumption per capita and consumption per unit area. This goes back to when we were previously talking about occupancy, operating hours, and square footage. Those really need to be accurate for it to flow through the other categories. These are your scoring metrics. These are the values you need to keep a check on to make sure that your scoring is appropriate. If any of these are high, your score is going to reflect that with a low score. This gets compared, the water per person per day and water per unit area per day gets compared to similar buildings for your score to be illustrated. The score is out of 0 to 100 if you choose to use that scale for a global comparison, or the score of 0 to 15 for a LEED certification. Again, at a very high level, lower water consumption is a better score. The score of 15 out of 15 is for projects that are using no potable water in the most recent 12 months. So 0 net potable water use. Okay, so when we talk about comparison to simple buildings, to similar buildings, what does that mean? What you're seeing on my screen is a graph that illustrates square footage and occupancy. These are the two metrics that you enter when you first come into the platform. It really helps the platform identify what kind of a space the building is. So for example, at the very bottom of the scale, on the bottom right, is a small square footage and a small occupancy. So think of this kind of like a tenant space. It's a small space with office people. If you come to the center bottom of the chart, where there's like 4 to 5 floating dots on the outside, that's a medium square footage, also with medium occupancy, or large square footage with medium occupancy. And that's kind of like your convention center space. They're large footprints of buildings. All the way to the top on the left, that's your high square footage, high occupancy. That's something like a very big hotel, where there's a lot of density in the space. I think what the graph is not showing in this resolution is that there's many more dots behind it, which is essentially the entire data set in ARC. So you have the entire data set, which is every building in ARC that's providing data. Then you have a reference set, which is the red dots on the screen that represent illustrated performance levels within that kind of space. And then you have your own performance score, which is visualized when you compare to these red dots. Again, the idea that everyone's getting LEED Platinum in ARC is something I hear all the time. It's true, some buildings are performing exceptionally and are getting awarded LEED Platinum, but those are the buildings that want to talk about it. That's why the stories you hear are from the LEED Platinum projects. There are many more here at the bottom that have an opportunity to improve and will improve and maybe get to LEED Silver and LEED Certified. Even that's great, right? Like they're doing something to do better. When we look at LEED certification levels and water performance, we see that the trend still holds. LEED Platinum uses less than half of LEED certified when you're tracking consumption. And so this is the reason LEED Platinum continues to score at a platinum level, because they're designed to be better buildings, they're operated better, and they're just consuming lesser than expected. All right. What is Barry hearing from his clients?
Well, I think the thing that stands out about water is that previously people have had a lot of difficulty getting any kind of indication of how they're doing. With energy, there are a variety of other metrics out there. Primarily in the U.S., it's the Energy Star score. So people are used to having a score for energy and then seeing that score move based on action. For water, it's been very much a mystery because there's no simple score. And so the value that we've seen with the ARC performance score for water is that for the first time, people have something they can sort of get their head around and say, I'm doing well or I'm doing poorly. And what we found is that this third bullet, did the score motivate improvement? I think water is the one category where we have seen the most action happen after people see their performance score. People typically have already done energy things, and they're just starting to understand some of the other categories. Water, once they realize where they are and that there's room for improvement, that's when the fun starts. And, there's all the various ways you can do that, and there have been case studies that have been talked about that illustrate that, but whether it's the indoor plumbing fixtures, the irrigation controllers, cooling tower, water management. And one of the interesting things we've seen is that more and more buildings are using interval data meters for water. And that's been more prevalent for energy, but now people are focusing more on water, and that's an illustration of an interesting pattern of usage. And we found some really weird things happen in interval data with water in the middle of the night sometimes. That's useful to know. So the one other thing I will say about water is, and I skipped over the first bullet of how easy is it to get the data, because usually when we look at an ARC project in ARC, energy and water, you're sort of assuming we got that, just throw it in there or link it up to Portfolio Manager and you're done. I would say that at least 20% of our projects, there's a problem with the water data. Either the meter was broken for a few months, the water company forgot to bill, or they had the wrong multiplier, or something went haywire. They replaced the meter, and the gadget that was supposed to do the automatic meter reading and send it to the city wasn't communicating properly, and no one knew about it. So the data part of water is something to look at, because it's not just an automatic assume because you're getting a bill every month, you have clean data.
Two down, waste. For waste, the score is from 0 to 8. And the highest score is achieved by projects that have net zero. That is a project that is not diverting 100% or generating very low. So the intent with this category is really to focus on not only waste diversion, which is important, but also source reduction. Like looking a little bit upstream from your waste bin, where is your materials coming from? What are you bringing into the building? What are you taking out of the building? What you don't bring in, you don't have to take out, right? So the intent is really to channel the focus into what is coming into the building and then going to a waste to the waste bin, which is waste generated. So you can provide data directly into the ARC platform. At a minimum, we're looking for one analysis in the most recent 12 months. We just wanted to start there because many people had not heard what a waste audit was previously. Many people had never conducted a waste audit. It was a straightforward invoice that they paid every month, every quarter, based on a standard assumption of how much waste was being generated and diverted. With the waste audit, you're able to look at more granular information that gives you more insights, not just in terms of environmental performance, but financial performance as well. And so you can provide data as frequently as you choose. I have one project that is using a sensor-driven weighing machine that provides data on a daily basis. Of course, quarterly, monthly, once a year is also fine. The granularity of the data is helpful to drive improvements, but it does not impact your score. When you provide us with the weight of materials generated and the weight of materials diverted, it gets converted into a per capita, per day value. So how much is one person, you and me, in the building, generating and diverting? Once that's been provided, it gets compared to similar buildings to arrive at a score. 0 to 100 for a performance score, and 0 to 8 for a LEED score. At a very high level, what we want project teams to focus on is to lower the quantity of waste generated. That should be the first step in improving your score. That will have the most impact on your score as well. And of course, higher the quantity of waste diversion, better is your score. Both those metrics together will drive your score in the ARC platform. Let me take a step back and just talk about that a little bit more. This is slightly different from how we've been working in the LEED operation and maintenance rating system, where the focus was on waste diversion. That continues to be the case. Please don't get me wrong. We do want projects to improve their waste diversion, but we also want to take a couple more steps forward and lower the waste generated. So if you're looking for, when you provide the data, don't look for the diversion rate, look for the generation rate. This is a colorful graph that illustrates what I just said. It's the pounds of waste generated at the bottom, pounds of waste undiverted on the other axis, and the score on the far right. It took me a minute just to describe the graph, and it took me several minutes before that to describe what was happening. So if you want to see this for yourself in real life, just use the platform. When you get a score, people like Barry, me, and many others in the room are available to discuss what your score means for your project. But again, what you're seeing here is that the maximum score of 8 is available to projects that generate less and divert more. Back to our sample scores. Not everyone does great. Not every LEED building does great. Many non-LEED buildings do very well too. So the intent here is to really begin to measure, benchmark, see where you're at, and then make improvements. Across LEED certified projects, we're seeing LEED Platinum really sets the bar high for projects in terms of pounds per person per day. If I had to give you a very vague or random numerical value to compare this against, LEED Platinum pounds per person per day is 0.70. In North America, on a typical office building, that's 2.3. What are we hearing from others, Barry?
Okay. So in this case, the first bullet, I think, is the main thing here. How easy was it to get the data? This is something that, we talk about LEED being a market transformation, and we have seen a lot of progress in the waste industry in terms of starting to try to get that data. We've seen more waste haulers providing regular data, and we've seen more people coming into the field being able to conduct waste audits. However, it's not where we need it to be, and we were in a situation where we couldn't find anybody to do a waste audit, so we found these two guys in the upper left corner that you might recognize one of them, and the other one's at that table. So we had to do it ourselves, and so I just wanted to give you a few tips in case you have to do one yourselves. And this is because, people that were in the 8 a.m. session heard from Nick. He knows how to do a waste audit. We didn't know how to do it. So the first mistake we made was we took all those bags and we dumped them out on the floor. Bad idea. About 3 hours into it, we decided, hey, it'd be better to do this on a table level. So then we set up a table and did the rest of it on a table. Second lesson learned, this might have been more important, don't wear shorts when you're doing a waste audit. Okay, next category.
Human experience. From waste to human experience. So the human experience category has been the most intriguing for many people who use ARC, for us at ARC, to just hear the varied opinions across the world. Within the human experience category, it's really with the intent of enhancing what it means for you and me to be in a building, to make buildings better, not just in terms of how they operate, whether financially or environmentally, but for the people in the building who use it on a daily basis. So we're looking to have more smiley faces in the room. When you take a survey in ARC, you use a smiley face all the way to the left to show how satisfied you are with the space, and perhaps a few to the left, right?
Right.
That show how dissatisfied you're with the space. Take the survey, you'll see it's fun. And what seems like a very straightforward approach on the front end is actually a scale on the back end. So extremely dissatisfied would be 0, and extremely satisfied would be 10. So when someone in the building takes this survey, they're responding to a smiley, frowny face because it's fun, it's easy to implement, takes under 30 seconds to respond to the survey. But on the back end, it gets converted into a numerical value that helps us identify what is the level of performance in terms of satisfaction. So for example, this particular response would be 8 on 10. What do we see across buildings? Again, the story continues, and thankfully so. LEED Platinum exceeds expectations. We are seeing scores of 8 or above in Platinum projects. Also not very far behind, certified silver and gold, somewhere between 6 to 7. So these buildings are proving that when you design, construct, and manage a building well, occupants are happy. USGBC also recently released an externally conducted audit and study of occupants in spaces. I would encourage all of you to take a look at that as well. So the human experience category is the category that has 3 individual components. 1/3 of the score comes from the Occupant Satisfaction survey that we just saw. You can conduct the survey whenever you like, and that will contribute to 1/3 of the score. 1/3 of the score comes from interior carbon dioxide levels. You can collect this information in different ways and at any point in the year. When you provide this information to ARC, you get 1/3 of the score. The third 1/3 comes from the total volatile organic compound levels. Again, you can conduct an air quality audit to collect this information and provide that data. As soon as you provide it, you're then contributing to the remaining 1/3 of the score. The reason I walked through that is to illustrate that you don't have to do everything at the same time. As you do it, your score incrementally reflects the information that's provided. All right. With CO2, or carbon dioxide levels, we're looking for internal spaces to be under 1,000 parts per million. So the lower you are from there, the better your score is going to be. Usually in LEED certified spaces, we see around 600 to 700 parts per million. If you're in a gym and running, you're going to see 2,000. If it's anything above that, you need to be outside and not in that space. With TVOC, the score begins to populate when you're at 500 micrograms per cubic meter. If you're above that, you're going to get a score of 0. This is where I see a lot of emails. Tells me I input the data, but my score is not working. The platform is broken. Is it? It's not. It just shows that the performance is bad and the score is 0. So the score starts at 500 micrograms per cubic meter, and the lower you are from there, the better your score is going to be. Typically, we see around 200 micrograms per cubic meter. It's fine. It's not bad. It's just the nature of what it is. But there's no reason to be alarmed. You don't try to get to 0 in every category is, I guess, what I'm trying to say. With TVOCs as well, when you conduct the audit, which we'll hear more about from Barry, there are things that could trigger it. For example, the materials you use in your cleaning supplies. That's one reason TVOCs might be triggered. It's also an indicator that you might want to consider a more healthy product when you're cleaning your surface. Another trigger could be perfumes. Those set off TVOCs as well. It's a choice you can make of whether you want to use that product or not. Oranges also set off TVOC levels. That's a good habit. I would keep it. I would just eat it at a different time when the IAQ test is not being conducted. So when you provide each of these pieces into the ARC platform, the occupant satisfaction survey results, the TVOC levels, the CO2 levels, it goes into the platform, and then it calculates a value to generate a score. So for the occupant satisfaction, we're looking at the average occupant satisfaction. So across the board, you might get responses 6 on 10, 5 on 10. The one person might say 1 on 10. At the end of the day, when you get the 25% response rate, the platform takes all the responses and calculates an average occupant satisfaction. We also look at the 95th percentile of carbon dioxide levels. This indicates the value at which your CO2 is most of the time in the building. We would like that to be under 1,000 parts per million to generate a score. Last but not the least, peak TVOC. So when you're conducting the audit, look for the highest TVOC value. That's what's going to trigger your score. The lower, the better. Once all of this information is in the platform, it uses the code to calculate the score, 0 to 100 for the performance score, and 0 to 20 for the lead score. Overall, higher satisfaction levels, lower carbon dioxide levels, lower TVOC levels equals a higher score.
Okay, so I think we're running out of time. So we need to speed up a little bit. Okay, so in terms of the human experience, this is the one category where there is no comparative data set. There is no magic formula, mystery thing going on that you're never going to find out about. You can know where this score comes from if you read the How to Start Beta Guide. It has every formula, every graph that you can determine your score based on the data. So that means the satisfaction portion is based on not just the number on that 1 to 10 scale, but also the variation in the responses. So if you get a 7 for satisfaction average, but it's a sloppy 7 all over the place, you might only get 5 or 6 points. But if you get a 7 and every single person answered the satisfaction on that 7 line, you'll get 7 points. With carbon dioxide, there is a graph in the beta guide. You can see if you're at 1,000 or higher, you're getting, the minimum to 0 points, and you can see where you hit the maximum points is if your CO2 levels equate closely to the outdoor air levels that we find. And similarly with TVOCs, if you're above 500, you're out, and then there's a scale down to 0, and the perfect score is if you have 0. So just quickly, Gautami kind of went through this already, but there's plenty of war stories with TVOC measurements. That's kind of the new twist in this whole thing. And we heard some, earlier today and yesterday. We have data on all of these sources of TVOCs. Some is more meaningful than others, and I will just say the middle one with the foot in the cast, It's not the foot odor we measured. It was a medical office building where they were making the casts that set off our meter because whatever they're using to make the casts had a lot of TVOCs in it. So I think the message with the TVOC readings is the goal is to get representative readings through the building, not a specific situation that's driving it crazy for some weird reason.
Right. Always test in regularly occupied spaces during regularly occupied times. Don't look for the worst case scenario. Look for the most common situation.
Is 0 possible?
Yes.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, 0 is possible on the meter, and then because the meter doesn't measure down to the units that we need, it winds up being 2.29 micrograms per cubic meter.
But again, another category, it's the only category that I would suggest you don't have to get to 0 in every single category. All right, saving the best for the last. I'm between you and the closing plenary, so I'm going to keep this going. The energy score, 0 to 33, easily the category with the most questions, and rightfully so, because there's so many ways to measure energy use, energy intensity, carbon use, carbon intensity. There's many scoring versions available too. Every country has a energy benchmarking program. And so really with the energy score and ARC, what we're looking to do is measure, monitor, and track carbon emissions associated with energy use. It's a global scale. So the score shows you where you stand against similar buildings across the world. That includes the Swedes up here, the project in Shanghai, the projects in North America, the projects in Chicago. So when you're in Mexico, when you look at your score, it's a reflection of where you stand across the world. So we're looking at basic building information that you provide for energy use. All energy use, all fuels. So electricity, gas, steam, renewable energy as well. Any renewable energy generated on site should be entered into the platform. It is 0 carbon emissions, so you are awarded for it. So when you provide the energy use data, it gets converted into carbon emissions per person and per unit of area. And the way it does that is by looking at the zip code that you initially provided. The zip code helps us determine which grid you are on and what carbon factor to apply to your energy use. Once we have this information in terms of carbon, you're compared to similar buildings, and you get a score of 0 to 100 for the performance score and 0 to 33 for the lead score. Projects that achieve 33 on 33 are demonstrating net 0 carbon in the most recent 12 months. At a very high level, lower your carbon emissions, better is your score. Okay, the energy that you provide can be any fuel that you use, right? We want you to account for all the fuels, whether it's district systems, whether it's solar power, anything that you use on the property should be included in the platform. Using the zip code, we convert the energy use into carbon. We use regional factors and provincial factors here in the United States and Canada, and we're using countrywide factors for all places across the world. We're open to discussing regional factors in other parts of the world too, so if you have any thoughts on that, please definitely reach out to me. And once we have the carbon data, you can visualize it in the platform. You can see your carbon emissions per person per day. You can see your annual carbon emissions. You can set goals to reduce them. And overall, lower the carbon emissions, better is your score. This goes back to the picture I showed you for water. This is where we look at what do similar buildings mean. So when you come into the platform and give us square footage and occupancy, your property finds its place in this graph. Depending on which red dot it's closest to, it's compared for energy performance. And if it's better, mediocre, or perhaps low performance, your score is awarded. Scores are across the board. It's not good or bad. It means these properties are committed to improving their performance. We see scores between 0 to 33. Of course, early adopters know that their buildings are performing well. That's why you see more projects up top. But that's a good thing because they're leaders and they want to demonstrate that. If we look at LEED certification levels, we do see the same trend. LEED Platinum outperforms the other certification levels. LEED certified is also at 3.68 carbon per person per year. While we're talking about carbon, one thing I find very intriguing for everyone is that when you look at carbon from energy use and carbon from transportation, it can almost be equal in any property, irrespective of where it's located. In some cases, the carbon from transportation may be higher too. So when we're talking about emissions, we want to talk about holistically accounting for both energy and transportation.
Okay, we are pretty much out of time, but there's a few big points on energy that I wanted to mention. One is that in addition to the per square foot and per occupant, there are two other factors that are taken into account in the energy calculation, and that is the hours of operation of the building and the location in terms of outdoor air temperatures. So those factors are used to adjust the energy numbers based on the conditions that the building happens to be in, as well as then being put into the comparative mode with other LEED buildings around the world. So so that's a little unique to the energy category. But I think the most unique thing here is this question of what is the metric? We've heard a lot this week about more emphasis on climate change, more emphasis on tracking carbon. And this is where ARC has jumped out in front, and we are trying to understand what that means and how to digest it and how to improve it, but recognizing that this is a new thing. So what we have done, we're always used to our Energy Star score as the energy metric. When we looked at 25 buildings that we put in the ARC platform, we compared their Energy Star scores to their performance scores, and we found an R-squared of 0.18, which people know is not good. Basically, the Energy Star score has no correlation to the energy performance score in ARC, and it's because it's based on a totally different metric. Carbon emissions can vary, and the graph on the right there are the factors, the emissions factors for each of the E-grid regions in the United States, and you can see from the worst, which is middle Mississippi, to the best, which is upstate New York, there is a factor of 5 to 1 in terms of carbon emissions per unit of electricity. So if you have a building in upstate New York and you have a building in Mississippi and they have the same energy efficiency performance, their carbon emissions are going to vary by a factor of 5. And that's what ARC is judging that building on, carbon emissions from energy, not just energy efficiency. Obviously, energy efficiency is going to affect the carbon emissions, but it's a different metric, and that's what we have to get our heads around.
So you can use, I'm going to breeze through the last few slides. You can use the performance score in ARC in multiple ways. LEED certification is just one of them. Please refer to the 4.1 guide for more information if your building is not certified and wants to achieve LEED certification. We also have the recertification guidance published this week, so please take a look at that. The reason I suggested is any building that was previously certified to LEED, any rating system, any version, is free to use ARC. You can benchmark your performance, and if you choose to recertify, you can submit that data for recertification. Get started with what you have, benchmark where you're at, submit the project for review, and that's when you get recognized with a LEED certification. We talked a lot about buildings today, but the same concept has been applied to transit, to certify transit stations across the world, also applied to cities, to certify cities across the world, and Chicago is a LEED Platinum city. Thank you so much for staying late. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you. Thank you.